Prometheus' story is often structured to be a cautionary tale. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is alternatively titled The Modern Prometheus, as the protagonist, who is also the villain in the story and the perfect representation for neglectful fathers, Victor Frankenstein parallels the Titan's desire for creation. Victor decides to play God and with the help of science, animated his little art project made from old dismembered body parts and chemicals. And other stories that are inspired by Prometheus have the same message and serve as what not to do guidelines. And I get it. Purposely defying the laws of nature to stroke one's ego while putting people's safety and Mother Nature at risk is something that we should all avoid. But ultimately, to me, Prometheus' story doesn't mirror that of evil geniuses who create Oppenheimer-esque levels of destruction and chaos, all for the pursuit of science and innovation that are then used by world leaders to wipe out bloodlines and destroy forests to build strip malls. His story resembles that of activists, rebels, and resistance forces, anyone who challenges tyrants and sympathizes with those whose rights, lives, and dignity are being stripped away by people in power. Because let's face it, the Victor Frankensteins of today are making millions from their patented weapons, but it's the activists who are often bound, like Prometheus.
Now I know what it feels like to be God.
Nicknamed the Trickster, Prometheus is the Titan's son of Iapetus and Clymene. He is known for breathing life into clay, creating humanity. Human arts and sciences are also credited to his name in ancient Greek mythology. His first appearance in recorded writing that we know of is in Hesiod's Theogony. In that version, Prometheus uses his wit to be a menace to Olympus. In the trick at Mekone, where the mortals and immortals congregated to quote-unquote settle accounts, Prometheus prepared two sacrificial offerings. One was beef inside an ox's stomach, the other was bull's bones wrapped in fat. Zeus chose the ugly, inedible present because of the packaging, and the mortals then started using this trick to keep the meat and only burn the bones when offering sacrifices to the gods. They are literally omnipotent, so why would they require so much from mortals? The Olympians are the very definition of the ruling class we see all around the world today, who exploit the working class, donate a measly fraction of their looted income for quote-unquote humanitarian reasons, and then award themselves for their philanthropy and perceived goodness. If Prometheus' trick wasn't enough, the mortals' actions further enraged Zeus. How dare they prioritize themselves when they should be giving their best cattle and crops to the most powerful beings who can simply whip up a 3 Michelin star banquet? So Zeus commissioned Hephaestus and Athena to create Pandora and her jar. Pandora was the first mortal woman, created as the harbinger of destruction amongst mortals. And that's not all. Zeus tasked Hephaestus to fashion metal binds for Prometheus and tied him up Mount Caucasus, where an eagle pecks at his liver for all of eternity. In ancient Greece, the impunity of the Olympians was rarely ruminated on and almost never challenged. In fact, although democracy is an Athenian ideology, its birthplace was not as democratic as it seemed, as evidenced by the Melian dialogue, which is a topic for another day. Aeschylus, a Greek playwright in 5th century BC, was the one who rehabilitated Prometheus' image and was critical of Zeus's regime and ways of punishment in his play Prometheus Bound. The primordials viewed the mortals as their playthings, seeing as their lives were relatively disposable in contrast to the immortality of the gods and titans. Human frailty did not invite grace nor providence, but ridicule and contempt. As the Athenians uttered in Melos, "The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must." There is a millennia-long belief that anyone with any form of power must wield it to subjugate anyone without. We have seen it during European colonialism world tour and the Atlantic slave trade, the 2 world wars, civil wars, any type of war. And even in this supposedly meritocratic, global, modern capitalist society, slavery still exists, colonialism still exists. Any form of corruption has seeped its way into almost every industry and institution. The thesis for this essay was actually developed last year when I read Circe by Madeline Miller. The sorceress Circe, exiled to the island of Aiaia, is often visited by the messenger god Hermes, and in one of their conversations, they discuss Prometheus. Still, I have never understood why helping mortals made Zeus so angry. "Tell me," he said, "who gives better offerings, a miserable man or a happy one?" "A happy one, of course." "Wrong," he said. "A happy man is too occupied with his life. He thinks he is beholden to no one. But make him shiver, kill his wife, cripple his child, then you will hear from him. He will starve his family for a month to buy you a pure white yearling calf. If he can afford it, he will buy you 100. But surely," I said, "you have to reward him eventually, otherwise he will stop offering. Oh, you would be surprised how long he will go on. But yes, in the end, it's best to give him something. Then he will be happy again, and you can start over." So this is how Olympians spend their days, thinking of ways to make men miserable. "There's no cost for righteousness," he said. "Your father is better at it than anyone. He would raise a whole village if he thought it would get him one more cow." The conversation reminds me of the ones that we so often have in the Philippines. Why is poverty so ubiquitous? Well, it's because of the lack of education and the fact that kids would much rather find jobs or become street vendors than to starve while going to school. Some schools aren't even allowed to function, and indigenous children are seen as subversives before they can even learn to read and write properly. The educational system is rigged and perpetuates this cycle of poverty and illiteracy, and those below the poverty line are dependent on handouts by the government. Relief goods and aid paid for by the Filipino people have photos and names of politicians. They use it as leverage to win the next elections. Political dynasties are hard to quash when so many would allow their votes to be bought because at least it puts food on the table. Now, before I continue expounding on the horrors of abuse of power in contemporary society, let's go and take a pit stop and look at one of the most famous figures in all of history. This is a hot take and probably isn't an original thought, but I believe that Jesus did not die for my sins. Language plays a very important role in propaganda, as we have seen throughout history and in literature, but especially in the last 2 months since the siege of Gaza. I have been following this quote-unquote conflict in detail since 2021 and learned about the absence of sovereignty in Palestine in 2018 from my politics and governance class. And the first thing that I noticed is that the deployment of language to dehumanize Palestinians isn't subtle. It is an in-your-face type of cruelty that even kids could pick up on it while reading anything about the situation. In fact, the word conflict has been used by major news outlets and even by some academics, when the word should be occupation, colonialism, genocide, ecocide, ethnic cleansing. Now back to Jesus. Jesus did not die for my sins. Rather, he died because an oppressive, occupying force, which at the time was the Roman Empire, killed him in cold blood. The occupying army ordered his execution, but not before subjecting him to torture, his very own Via Dolorosa. To say otherwise is reductive and places the blame on those who subscribe to Christianity and all its denominations. It also obscures the fact that Jesus was an activist. He gathered large crowds of people and preached to them about loving your neighbor, valuing community. He told men who lusted after women to gouge their eyes out instead of being misogynist. Before Princess Diana helped destigmatize AIDS by touching a patient, Jesus was out there destigmatizing leprosy. And one of his disciples, Simon, was a zealot. Zealots during Jesus' life was a group who actively revolted against the Roman Empire's occupation of Palestine. And if we were to look at Jesus' philosophy, it is understandable why the Roman colonizers felt the need to get rid of him. Their power was challenged by a man who put emphasis on love rather than cruelty, on being in communion with everyone, especially the marginalized. He even denounced people who actively participated in the stoning of a woman for simply being a sex worker, when all of us have sinned. Of course, it is a sad thought that much of what he stood for is twisted to fit the agenda of religious extremists and bigots. So if we are to move forward, it is important to look back and see things for what they were. Human rights defenders, freedom fighters, and activists, even in the time of Jesus, in the time of the ancient Greeks, had targets on their backs. And it's not any different now.
We only mean vigorous action in self-defense. And that vigorous action, we feel, we're justified in initiating by any means necessary. And when we say this, the press calls us racists in reverse. With skillful manipulating of the press, they're able to make the victim look like the criminal, and the criminal look like the victim. Right now, when in New York, we had a couple cases where police grabbed the brother and beat him unmercifully, and then charged him with assaulting them. They used the press to make it look like he's the criminal and they're the victim. This is how they do it. And if you study how they do it here, then you'll know how they do it over here. It's the same game going all the time. And if you and I don't awaken and see what this man is doing to us, then it'll be too late. They may have the gas ovens already built before you realize that they're hot.
Now that we have looked back, it is our responsibility to be mindful of the media that we consume and cross-reference. Social media has made it increasingly difficult to filter out fake news from real ones. Thankfully, the internet allows us to have access to hundreds of thousands of articles, journals, videos, and other media that can help us fact-check. It is also so important to be critical consumers of art and media so as not to fall victim to propaganda. Reading between the lines is essential, as Malcolm X taught us. And activists and protesters are often resented for causing disruption. People forget or don't understand that activists take to the streets to disrupt. That is the point. And if the world weren't so cruel, why would activists, workers, anyone on strike take the time to stand under scorching heat or rain to demonstrate if it weren't a matter of urgency and importance? It's almost as if the world that we live in and the people who run it has pushed so many people to take to the streets. So Olympus can paint Prometheus as a trickster and bind him on Mount Caucasus. The Roman Empire can crucify Jesus, and police can gun down activists, farmers, black and brown lives, indigenous communities, and simple civilians all they want. But history has taught us time and time again that tyranny always has its end. Impunity never lasts. Empires and dictators have fallen. Freedom is a constant struggle, and best believe that those who resist will be remembered for their heroism. So they can destroy the schools and libraries. They can pay off companies to rebrand their image and rewrite history. They can write articles that dehumanize the victims and kiss the land the oppressors walk on. But there will be people who will remember how it actually went down. So may all those who benefit from war and the destruction of lives, lands, cultures, and memories be haunted by the ghosts of their sins. And may all those who seek liberation be granted such, in this lifetime and the next.
Love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really it is held together, by the love and the passion of very few people.